Sarah, pregnant and struggling, had no choice but to buy the dilapidated cottage tucked away in the woods for a mere few $100s. She thought it would be a temporary fix, a place to escape the chaos of her life. Little did she know, this forgotten home held secrets that would change everything, secrets worth millions. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. If you love stories about second chances and hidden treasures, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is going to blow your mind. Let's get started. The rain fell heavily outside, blurring the world into a gray haze. Sarah stood at the window of her tiny apartment, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other clutching the last of her savings in an envelope. The future seemed bleak, and her heart felt heavier than it had in weeks. She had once dreamed of a life full of promise of building a family with the love of her life. But now, with a broken relationship behind her and a baby on the way, Sarah's world had been reduced to a series of small, hard choices. The apartment was too small, the bills too many. She was tired of running to the food bank and waiting for the electricity to flicker back on. She was tired of feeling like she was constantly chasing something she couldn't reach. That's when she saw the listing for the cottage. It was tucked away on the edge of town, a dilapidated, forgotten house that no one wanted. The price was too good to pass up a fraction of what she had left. $400,000 houses felt impossible, but this cottage, listed for only $5,000, seemed like a glimmer of hope in an otherwise dark world. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the worn-down exterior of the place in the photo. It wasn't much, certainly not the home of her dreams, but it was a roof. It was a place that could provide a moment of peace, a chance to start fresh. She didn't have much, but she had enough for this, enough to put her in control, at least for now. The next day, Sarah drove to the cottage, the engine of her old car sputtering under the weight of her thoughts. As she pulled onto the dirt road that led to the property, she felt an odd mix of dread and hope. The small house sat hunched in the shadow of tall, imposing trees, the windows dark like the eyes of something forgotten. The yard was overgrown with weeds and vines, but something about it called to her. She didn't know what, but she could feel it. This place was waiting for her. Sarah walked through the overgrown yard and up to the front door, the ground beneath her feet squelching from the recent rain. She hesitated for just a moment, her hand on the rusty doorknob. When she opened it, a musty scent hit her: old wood, damp earth, and dust. The darkness inside was overwhelming, but she stepped in anyway, drawn by some strange pull she couldn't explain. The silence was thick, like the house itself was holding its breath. She looked around, taking in the peeling wallpaper, the cracked floorboards, and the smell of decay that seemed to linger in the air. But even in its brokenness, there was something beautiful about the place. Something that whispered that if given the right hands, it could be more than just a rundown shell. Sarah moved through the house slowly, her hands tracing the walls as she walked. Each room told a story of a family once living here, of laughter that had long since faded into memory. And then, in the corner of what appeared to be the living room, she spotted it, an old trunk, half hidden beneath a pile of discarded furniture and cobwebs. Her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't much, but there was something about it, something that felt important. Without thinking, she made her way over to it, her mind racing with the possibilities of what could be inside. Maybe just old clothes, maybe junk. But there was no way to know without opening it. She knelt down, brushing the dust from the top, and pried open the rusted latch. Inside, wrapped in an old quilt, was a collection of objects that seemed to tell a story all their own. Old letters tied together with twine, a few photos, and a small box, its edges worn smooth by time. Sarah's fingers trembled as she reached for it, feeling the weight of what she had just uncovered. It felt like more than just forgotten things. It felt like a connection to the past. As she held the box in her hands, Sarah felt something shift inside her. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel so alone. In that moment, with the rain still pouring outside, she realized that this cottage, this forgotten place, might just be the beginning of something much bigger than she ever expected. The weeks that followed were a blur of dust, old furniture, and the steady rhythm of Sarah's hands working tirelessly to make the cottage livable. The house, once so dark and depressing, was beginning to show the faintest glimmer of life again. But Sarah's exhaustion was beginning to weigh heavily on her shoulders. With each passing day, the reality of her situation settled in. She was still alone, still broke, and still trying to piece together a future she couldn't quite see. Her pregnancy was progressing, her belly rounding, and while the thought of a child to care for filled her with a quiet excitement, it also reminded her of everything she had lost and everything she had yet to build. The baby would be here soon, and the cottage wasn't ready. Her savings were all but gone, and the work was piling up. There were moments, in the dead of night, when the cottage creaked and groaned, that Sarah thought about giving up. She wondered if she had made a mistake, if the dream of a fresh start had been nothing more than a distraction from the harsh reality of her life. She couldn't even afford a fresh coat of paint for the walls, let alone all the renovations the cottage desperately needed. As Sarah wiped the sweat from her brow one afternoon, her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. She had never expected things to be easy, but she hadn't anticipated feeling so overwhelmed either. The money had run out. The world outside seemed just as unreachable as ever. And yet, despite everything, there was still something in her heart, some flicker of hope that refused to die. She sat down in the small kitchen, elbows on the table, staring at the walls she'd already cleaned, wondering if it would ever feel like home. The air smelled faintly of fresh wood, but it still held the scent of neglect, of years of abandonment. And then, as if in answer to her silent prayer, she heard a soft creak from the back of the house. It was faint, but it was there. Sarah froze, listening. The sound came again, this time louder. The floorboards shifting, something moving beneath the surface. Her heart beat a little faster. She stood up and walked toward the back of the house, past the living room where the trunk had been, past the dust-covered floor. As she approached the door leading to the cellar, she felt a strange magnetic pull. She hesitated. The cellar had always felt ominous to her, as though something had been left behind in that dark space, something that wasn't meant to be found. But her curiosity got the better of her. She reached for the rusty handle and slowly pulled open the door. The air was cooler down there, musty with the scent of mildew and decay. She pulled the light chain, and a dim bulb flickered to life. The basement was small, packed with old, rotting furniture, boxes, and stacks of discarded papers. But in the far corner, something caught her eye. There, tucked behind a broken chair, was a small wooden chest, its edges carved with intricate patterns. She felt her pulse quicken. It was like something was drawing her to it, urging her to open it. But what could possibly be inside? Another forgotten treasure? A reminder of the past? She had no idea, but she felt as though her heart might burst from anticipation. Taking a deep breath, Sarah crouched down and reached for the chest. It was heavy, much heavier than she had expected. The wood creaked as she lifted the lid, revealing a collection of old books, yellowed with age. Among them was a small leather-bound journal, its cover worn and cracked. She pulled it free, her hands trembling as she flipped it open. The handwriting inside was elegant and precise, written in ink that had long since faded. As Sarah read the first few lines, her breath caught in her throat. The journal didn't belong to just anyone. It belonged to the original owner of the cottage, a man who had lived here years before. And as she read further, Sarah realized that the man had not only built the house, but had hidden something extraordinary, something worth far more than the price she had paid for the cottage itself. The journal spoke of a hidden room, secret compartments, and a treasure that had been passed down through generations, to a treasure so valuable that it could change her life forever. Sarah's head spun with the possibilities. A treasure? In her cottage? Her heart pounded, and for the first time since she'd walked through that front door, she felt like the weight of the world had shifted. Maybe, just maybe, this was the sign she had been waiting for. With renewed hope, Sarah closed the journal and clutched it to her chest, knowing that she had just uncovered a piece of a story that was bigger than anything she had ever imagined. And though she had no idea what lay ahead, she was certain of one thing: this forgotten cottage, this abandoned dream, was about to reveal its secrets in the most unexpected way. The next few days were a whirlwind of excitement and anxiety. Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the journal she had found. It was as though the words on the yellowed pages were calling to her, urging her to dig deeper. As the cottage sat silently around her, Sarah pored over the journal at every opportunity, desperate to piece together the mysteries of the past. The original owner, a man named Samuel Blake, had written about building the cottage in great detail, every beam, every stone laid. The journal described the house as a sanctuary, a place to escape the troubles of the world. But it wasn't just the cottage that Samuel had built with his own hands. Hidden beneath the floorboards, He had mentioned something else. A secret room. A compartment that only he and his family knew about. The treasure, he had written, was a symbol of his ancestors' wealth, a legacy passed down through the generations. As Sarah read, she found herself drawn deeper into the story. Samuel had lived alone in the cottage, a recluse by nature, and had carefully concealed his treasure from the outside world. But as time passed, and the world changed, the treasure was forgotten. Samuel had never told anyone about it. No one outside his family knew of its existence. His journal, Sarah realized, was the key to finding it. But why had he hidden it? What had driven him to keep such a thing a secret? The journal gave no answers. The final pages were cryptic, hinting at a great event that had forced Samuel to abandon the house. A storm? A betrayal? Sarah wasn't sure, but the words, "I must leave before it's too late," echoed in her mind. The fear in those words made her shiver. Something had driven Samuel away from his sanctuary, and in doing so, the treasure had remained hidden for decades. Sarah spent the next few days searching the cottage, following the clues in the journal. She knew the hidden room had to be somewhere on the first floor, but where? She checked the walls, the floors, even the attic, but the secret room remained elusive. It was as though the house itself was holding its breath, refusing to give up its secrets. One afternoon, as Sarah was about to give up and retreat for the day, she noticed something odd. The old, creaky floorboards in the kitchen seemed to dip underfoot. Her heart raced. She crouched down and began to pry at the boards. After several minutes of pulling, she uncovered a small trap door. It was nearly invisible, hidden beneath years of dust and grime. She stared at it for a long moment, her fingers hovering over the latch. Could this be it? The hidden room? Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the trap door and descended into the dark, cool space beneath the house. What she would find in the shadows below would change her life forever. The air in the basement was thick with dust, and the faint smell of mildew mixed with the musty scent of forgotten memories. Sarah could barely see her hand in front of her face, but the faint light from the basement bulb illuminated enough to reveal a small, cramped room beneath the house. She stepped carefully down the narrow stairs, her feet landing softly on the cold concrete floor. The room was small, no bigger than a closet, but there was something undeniably different about it. There were no windows, no doors, just old, disorganized piles of forgotten belongings, a dusty wicker chair, cracked picture frames, and a few broken boxes. It looked like nothing more than a storage space. But Sarah's intuition told her otherwise. She could feel the weight of something ancient in the air, something waiting to be discovered. Her fingers brushed along the walls, feeling the rough stone beneath her skin, and then she noticed it. A door. Hidden behind a thick layer of dust and cobwebs was a small wooden door, barely visible in the gloom. It was old, its wood darkened with age, and its frame barely discernible against the walls. Her pulse quickened. This was it. The door that the journal had spoken of, the door to the hidden room. With shaky hands, Sarah reached for the doorknob. The wood groaned as she turned it, and the door creaked open with a soft protest. What lay beyond was shrouded in darkness. She stepped into the room, her breath catching as she felt around for a light switch. Her hand found it, and with a click, the room was bathed in a dim, flickering light. What she saw took her breath away. The room was filled with items that seemed completely out of place in a house like this. Old paintings, ornate furniture, and strange, unfamiliar artifacts lined the walls. But what stood out the most was the chest sitting in the center of the room. It was large, made of dark wood, and adorned with intricate carving symbols she couldn't quite understand. Her heart raced as she moved toward it. This was it, the treasure she had read about. She kneeled beside the chest and ran her fingers along its edge, feeling the smooth surface beneath her hands. There was a lock, old and rusted, but it looked as though it could still be opened. With trembling fingers, Sarah pulled a rusty key from her pocket, the same key she had found in the trunk. It fit perfectly into the lock. She turned it slowly, and the chest creaked open with a soft groan. Inside, nestled in velvet fabric, were bundles of old, gold coins, more than she had ever imagined. But it wasn't just gold. Alongside the coins were documents, old and yellowed with age, their contents still a mystery. Her hands shook as she reached for one of the papers. As she unfurled it, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It was a deed to land far away, a deed to property that could make her a fortune. Her hands trembled as she stared at the paper, trying to comprehend what she was seeing. This wasn't just treasure. This was wealth beyond her wildest dreams. And it was all hers. The forgotten cottage, it seemed, had been hiding more than just secrets. It had been hiding a fortune, a legacy, a chance at a new life. And as Sarah stood there, holding the treasure in her hands, she realized her journey had just begun. The weight of the chest in Sarah's hands felt surreal. The gold coins inside were cool to the touch, their glimmer promising a future she hadn't dared to dream about. But the toucher, documents, those old, crinkled papers, seemed to hold more than just a financial windfall. There was something deeper at play, something more personal. As she carefully unfolded one of the deeds, the ink on the paper was faded but still legible. It read, "Deed of ownership, property of the Blake family, original landholding of Samuel Blake, 1842. The name struck Sarah like a bolt of lightning. Samuel Blake, the man who had built the cottage, the man who had hidden his treasure so carefully. But the deed she held in her hands didn't just reference the small cottage. It mentioned multiple properties, land, estates, and buildings that had once been part of a vast family fortune. The more Sarah read, the more the story unfolded. Samuel Blake had not only been a builder, he was a landowner, a man who had once commanded wealth and power in the area. But as the years passed, his fortune had dwindled. The last pages of the journal hinted at a fall from grace, and now Sarah understood why he had hidden everything. He had lost it all: his land, his wealth, and perhaps even his legacy, except for what he had buried in the cottage. The chest seemed to be a time capsule, preserving the last of the Blake family's fortune. The documents detailed properties that no one in the town had remembered or even knew about. There were mentions of homes, large estates, and tracts of farmland that had been lost to history, and some of the land was still untouched, worth millions. But there was one detail that stood out: the last will and testament of Samuel Blake. Sarah's fingers trembled as she picked up the last document in the chest. She unrolled it slowly, the ancient parchment crinkling under her touch. The will was clear, its instructions simple yet staggering. The fortune, the properties, everything was to be passed down to his descendants, or failing that, to the one who found it. To the finder of this treasure, know that you have been chosen to continue my legacy. Do with it as you will. But remember, wealth is not just gold. It is family, history, and purpose. The realization hit Sarah with overwhelming force. This wasn't just a random inheritance, it was a calling. She wasn't just holding a fortune, she was holding a family's history, a legacy that had been buried for over a century. She sat back on the cold, concrete floor of the basement, the chest beside her. Her life had changed in an instant, but with the treasure came an undeniable responsibility. The Blake family's future was now intertwined with hers. She didn't know how she was going to manage it all, but one thing was clear: there was no going back. With the weight of the Blake family legacy heavy on her shoulders, Sarah knew she couldn't keep the treasure hidden forever. As much as the gold and property deeds promised a life of security, there was a part of her that knew this discovery was only the beginning. There were too many unanswered questions, too many details she couldn't ignore. Her first instinct was to tell someone, but she had no idea who would understand. Who could she trust with such a massive revelation? She wasn't even sure how the town would react if they knew the truth about the cottage and its treasure. After all, people had forgotten about Samuel Blake and his family. No one had even known about the land that had once belonged to them. Sarah's search for answers led her to the local library. She had learned from the journal that the Blake family had been prominent in the area long ago, and perhaps there were records of them that would help her piece together the rest of the story. Armed with the deeds and her growing sense of urgency, she scoured the library's old records, trying to find anything that could explain what had happened to the Blake family's wealth and why it had vanished from public memory. Hours passed as Sarah sifted through yellowed pages and old photographs. Finally, she stumbled across a dusty binder labeled "The History of Oak Hollow and Its Founding Families." Her heart raced as she flipped through the pages. There, in black and white, was a photograph of a young Samuel Blake. He was standing proudly in front of a large estate, a man in his prime, with a family by his side. It was the same estate mentioned in the deeds. The land that had once been his was right there in front of her. But as Sarah continued reading, she found the answers she was looking for, or, at least, a piece of the puzzle. A short obituary, dated 1911, described the death of Samuel Blake, and it was there that the trail of his wealth went cold. According to the article, his death was a result of a tragic accident involving a fire at one of his estates. The fire had destroyed everything, and the family's fortune seemed to vanish overnight. The article was vague, offering no real details about the fire, but it painted a picture of a man who had once been wealthy and influential, only to lose everything in a single, devastating event. And after that fire, the Blake family was never seen in town again. The mystery deepened. What had happened to the Blake family after the fire? How had they disappeared without a trace? And most importantly, where had all the wealth gone? Sarah sat back in her chair, staring at the photograph of Samuel Blake, trying to piece together the timeline. The journal had mentioned something about leaving before it was too late. Was the fire the reason Samuel had abandoned everything, including his wealth? Or had he hidden it away before the tragedy struck? Her head spun with questions, but one thing was clear. The Blake family's story was far from over, and it was her job to uncover the rest. Sarah's mind was racing. The more she uncovered about the Blake family, the more questions arose. The fire that had destroyed Samuel Blake's wealth wasn't just an accident, it felt like a turning point. A deliberate attempt to erase everything. But why? Had Samuel hidden the treasure in the cottage, instead of securing it elsewhere? Determined to find answers, Sarah walked through the house once more, retracing every step. She opened drawers, checked under floorboards, and searched the attic, hoping to find more clues. It wasn't until she reached the overgrown garden behind the cottage that she noticed something unusual. Near the corner of the yard, partially covered by wild vines, was an old stone well. It had been there all along, but she had never thought to investigate it. Something about it now felt significant. She knelt down, brushing the overgrowth aside, and saw that the stone lid of the well was slightly ajar. Without thinking, she carefully lifted the lid. The cool air from the well rushed up, carrying with it a strange, musty scent. Inside, there was something shining, something metallic. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She grabbed a flashlight and shined it into the darkness. There, at the bottom of the well, was a metal box, gleaming in the dim light. She didn't hesitate. Her hands worked quickly, and within moments, she had the box in her arms. It was locked, but a key from the chest she had found earlier fit perfectly. As the lid creaked open, Sarah found more of the Blake family's treasure's ancient artifacts, gold, and a series of handwritten letters that seemed to tell a deeper, more personal story. The letters Sarah uncovered were different from anything she had expected. They weren't just business transactions or legal documents, they were intimate. The first letter she read was addressed to Samuel Blake's wife, Mary. It described their life together before the fire, filled with love, hopes, and dreams for the future. But the last letter, written just before the fire, hinted at something darker, something Samuel had been hiding even from his family. In it, Samuel wrote about a secret room beneath one of his estates, a place he had never shown anyone, not even Mary. The letter spoke of a hidden vault, and the more Sarah read, the more she realized that the treasure she had already found was only a small part of something much bigger. The letter also hinted at a tragedy that had taken place just before the fire. Samuel had spoken of a betrayal. Someone close to him, someone within his circle, had turned against him. Sarah could feel the weight of those words, the heartbreak and fear that had driven Samuel to hide everything, including his family's future. But the letter ended abruptly, with no mention of what had happened to the vault or the hidden room. Sarah's stomach twisted with anxiety. Was it still there, buried beneath the ruins of the Blake estate? Was the treasure just the beginning of a much larger, more dangerous discovery? She knew she had to find it, the secret room that could hold the key to unlocking the rest of Samuel Blake's legacy. As Sarah continued her search for answers, the pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. The letters, the gold, the deeds, they all seemed to point toward one undeniable fact. The cottage was just the surface. The treasure she had uncovered was only a small part of the Blake family's legacy, hidden away and nearly forgotten. It was the connection to Samuel Blake's estate that haunted her. The secret room beneath the estate, the vault that was rumored to hold even more wealth, was her next goal. But she had no idea where to begin searching for it. The estate had been burned to the ground in the fire, and the land had been abandoned. There were no records, no clear instructions on where to look. Determined, Sarah returned to the library, flipping through old maps of the area. She knew that the Blake family had owned several properties, but she hadn't realized just how expansive their holdings had been. In one of the old records, she found a reference to a second, hidden estate, one that had been completely untouched by the fire. Her breath caught. Could this be the fire? Location of the secret room Samuel had mentioned? She quickly made plans to visit the land, hoping that whatever remained of the estate might hold the final clue. The following morning, Sarah set out early. Armed with the maps and documents she had gathered, she drove to the coordinates she had found in the library. The land was far from the cottage, tucked away in a dense forest on the outskirts of town. As Sarah pulled up to the entrance of the estate, she couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The estate was in ruins, just as the fire records had described. However, there was something strange about it. The land, though abandoned, felt oddly preserved. The buildings were skeletal, but there was an eerie stillness to the place, as though time had frozen. Sarah stepped out of her car and approached the crumbling mansion, her heart racing with anticipation. She had no idea what she would find, but she knew she was getting closer to the final piece of the puzzle. The stories and the letters, the clues she had uncovered, they were all leading her here. As Sarah carefully explored the ruins, she found the remains of what seemed to be an old cellar door, half buried beneath layers of earth and debris. It looked like no one had touched it in years, yet something about it felt right. Could this be the entrance to the hidden room? She wasn't sure, but one thing was certain: she was on the verge of discovering something life-changing. The cellar door creaked under Sarah's touch as she pried it open, revealing a dark, narrow stairwell leading down into the depths of the earth. A chill ran down her spine, but her resolve was stronger than ever. She was determined to uncover the secrets buried beneath this estate, no matter the cost. The treasure she had already found: gold, ancient artifacts, and priceless documents, was only the tip of the iceberg. The true legacy of the Blake family was hidden down here, and it was calling her name. As she descended into the cellar, Sarah's flashlight flickered, casting long, distorted shadows across the stone walls. The air was damp and musty, the smell of decay thick in the air. Her heart beat faster as she reached the bottom of the stairs. The room she entered was vast, with high ceilings and stone walls covered in vines and mildew. It had once been a place of great significance, but now it was a forgotten part of history. Sarah scanned the room carefully, her flashlight sweeping over piles of debris, old furniture, and discarded tools. There was nothing remarkable at first glance, just remnants of the past. But as she moved further into the room, her foot hit something solid. She knelt down, brushing away the dust and dirt, and uncovered a large stone slab, just big enough to be the entrance to a hidden vault. Her breath caught in her throat. This had to be it. The secret room, the vault Samuel Blake had written about in his journal, was finally within reach. But then doubt crept in. Was she ready for this? What if the treasure wasn't what she expected? What if opening this vault brought more danger than she could handle? Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. Greed, betrayal, the weight of family history. The decision before her was huge, and for the first time, she questioned if she was truly prepared to bear the responsibility that came with it. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. No matter what, she had come this far. This discovery was hers, and she owed it to herself and to Samuel Blake to see it through. There was no turning back. With newfound determination, she pushed the stone slab aside, revealing a narrow passage leading deeper into the estate. Her hand tightened around the flashlight as she stepped forward, knowing that whatever lay ahead would change her life forever. The passage led Sarah into a small, hidden chamber deep beneath the estate. The walls were lined with shelves, some of them still filled with books, scrolls, and relics from a bygone era. The chamber was well preserved, as though it had been untouched for decades. But at the center of the room, on a stone pedestal, sat a large, ornate chest. It was decorated with intricate engraving symbols she recognized from the journal and the treasure she had already found. This chest was different from the others. It was more elaborate, more significant. This was the vault Samuel Blake had hidden from the world. Sarah's heart pounded as she approached it. The chest felt heavy with history, as though it had been waiting for her. She placed her hands on the lid, and with great care, lifted it open. Inside, there were no coins or jewels, but something far more precious: documents, ledgers, and deeds, each one carefully preserved in layers of velvet and cloth. As she sifted through the papers, she found something that made her gasp: a handwritten will, signed by Samuel Blake himself. It was clear from the language that this was the final will of the Blake family, the document that would determine the fate of the entire estate. The will confirmed everything Sarah had hoped for. The Blake family fortune, including the land, the properties, and the wealth, had all been passed down to her, but there was a catch. Samuel had written a clause in the will, stating that the inheritance would only be granted to someone who had proven themselves worthy, someone who had uncovered the treasure and understood its true value. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the final words of the will. To the one who finds this, may you understand the weight of the past and the promise of the future. This inheritance is not just of gold, but of legacy, responsibility, and purpose. Use it wisely, and you will honor my memory. Use it poorly, and it will be your downfall. The weight of those words sank into Sarah's chest. She wasn't just inheriting wealth, she was inheriting a legacy. Samuel Blake's life, his choices, and his downfall had all led her to this moment. And now, it was up to her to decide how to carry that legacy forward. As Sarah stared at the documents in front of her, her mind raced with questions. The inheritance wasn't just a gift, it was a test. Samuel Blake had made sure that only someone who truly understood the significance of the treasure could claim it. It wasn't just about the gold or the properties, it was about the legacy, the history, and the responsibility that came with it. But what was that responsibility? Samuel's final words echoed in her mind, warning her of the consequences if she failed. Use it wisely, and you will honor my memory. What did that mean? How could she honor a legacy she barely understood? She glanced at the deed to the land, the vast properties that were now hers to control. But with that land came decisions, challenges, and expectations she wasn't sure she was ready for. Could she manage such wealth? Could she live up to the promises Samuel had left behind? She wasn't sure. All she had ever wanted was to provide a stable future for herself and her child. But this was more than that. It was the power to shape history, to rebuild what had been lost, and to forge a new path. The weight of the decision hung heavy in her hands. She could walk away, leave the estate behind, and live a simpler life. Or she could embrace the legacy and build something new, something worthy of the Blake family name. As she sat there, holding the will and the deeds, Sarah realized that she didn't just need to find the treasure, she needed to find herself. She had come to this place, seeking a new beginning. But now she saw that this discovery wasn't just about escaping her past. It was about confronting it and deciding what kind of future she wanted to build. The choice was hers. The weight of the discovery sat heavily on Sarah's shoulders, but there was an undeniable thrill that ran through her veins. She had been handed not just a house and a treasure, but a legacy. Samuel Blake's journal had provided a glimpse into a life full of ambition, heartache, and ultimately, loss. But as Sarah read through the pages, she saw something more than just the tale of a fallen family. It was the story of a man's dream for his descendants to continue what he had started, to rebuild not just his fortune, but his very name. The journal spoke of an estate built from the ground up, and though the land was no longer in its prime, there was still something sacred about it. Samuel's writings made it clear that his greatest desire was to see his family flourish, to pass down what he had built and create something lasting. But it was also clear that this was no easy task. The Blake family had been betrayed. Samuel had trusted the wrong people, and in the end, it had cost him everything. The fire had wiped away the physical remnants of the Blake legacy, but it had failed to destroy the essence of what had been built. That essence was now Sarah's to carry forward. The realization struck her deeply. She wasn't just inheriting a fortune, she was inheriting a responsibility, a duty to honor the past and make it relevant in the present. The weight of this responsibility was immense, but Sarah had always been resilient. She had fought for everything she had, and this would be no different. As Sarah sat in the grand parlor of the Blake estate, the mansion that once echoed with laughter and life, she began to envision what she could do with the land. She wasn't just inheriting properties, she was inheriting a promise that had been left unfulfilled. She would honor that promise not just for herself, but for the community that had once known the Blake family as pillars of strength. The first task was to understand the land, the scope of the property, the resources it held, and the potential it offered. Samuel had left detailed maps in his journal, sketching out the boundaries of the estate, the old farming land, and the once bustling town that had surrounded it. Sarah pored over these maps, her eyes tracing the contours of the land as she began to formulate a plan. She wasn't a real estate mogul or a historian, But Sarah had something Samuel Blake didn't: the gift of hindsight. She could learn from his mistakes, avoid the pitfalls that had led to his downfall, and rebuild with a vision that included more than just wealth. It was about community, about revitalizing the land, about creating a place where people could thrive once more. She would transform the estate into something meaningful, something that could benefit generations to come. The realization that she had the power to reshape this legacy filled her with a quiet sense of pride. She had no desire to live in the past. She would use the Blake name, yes, but it was her own hard work, her own vision, that would define the future. Samuel had left her the tools, now it was up to her to use them. Her first meeting was with the town's council. She had made a decision to breathe life back into the estate by not just restoring the mansion, but by transforming it into a center for the arts. The land could host an artists' colony: painters, sculptors, musicians, writers. A place where creativity could flourish, just as it had in the past. And the surrounding area? It could be revitalized into a place for small-scale farms, community gardens, and a market for local artisans to sell their goods. The proposal wasn't just about profit. It was about restoring the very spirit of the land, the spirit that Samuel had once envisioned. The town had been desperate for revitalization, and Sarah knew this project could offer that. With the estate's resources, she could provide employment, foster community growth, and pay homage to the past while creating a brighter future. It wasn't going to be easy. She had to secure funding, rally support, and navigate the complex web of bureaucracy that came with such a large-scale project. But as Sarah met with local officials, business owners, and potential investors, she was met with enthusiasm. They saw the vision, they understood the significance, and they were willing to help. The Blake name, once a shadow in the town's history, was becoming a beacon for the future. Her days were filled with meetings, paperwork, and planning, but Sarah felt an immense sense of fulfillment. She was finally doing something for herself and for the community. The cottage, the treasure, the inheritance, it had all brought her here, to this moment where she could make a difference. The family legacy was no longer a burden. It was a foundation for something greater, something that would endure for generations. Sarah stood at the balcony of the estate one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of pink and orange. The land stretched out before her, still wild but now filled with possibility. This was her future, and she was ready to face it. The Blake estate began to transform, slowly at first, then with an energy that grew unstoppable. Sarah poured every ounce of her being into the project. There were moments when she doubted herself, when the weight of everything seemed unbearable. But as she saw the community rally behind her, she found the strength to keep going. She wasn't just restoring a mansion, she was restoring hope. The mansion itself, once a symbol of faded glory, began to take on new life. Contractors worked around the clock to repair the roof, reinforce the walls, and bring the interior up to modern standards without losing the character that made it unique. The gardens bloomed with flowers and vegetables, a testament to the work of the local farmers who had joined her in the project. But it wasn't just the physical transformation that mattered. Sarah had created something far more valuable. She had created a sense of purpose. People began to flock to the estate, not just for the promise of work or a place to live, but for the feeling of belonging. It was as if the spirit of the Blake family had infused the land, and now it was being shared with everyone who was part of the project. Sarah had learned quickly that leadership was about more than just making decisions. It was about inspiring others to see the vision and believe in it. She held meetings with the artists, the farmers, and the workers, making sure that everyone had a voice in the process. This wasn't just her dream, it was their dream, too. The town began to change, slowly at first, but with a sense of momentum that couldn't be ignored. The streets, once quiet and empty, were now alive with people, with energy, with the promise of something new. And as Sarah watched the transformation unfold, she realized that this was what Samuel Blake had wanted all along: a community that thrived, a family legacy that didn't end with tragedy, but continued on in the hearts of those who believed. The estate had become more than just a home. It had become a symbol of resilience, of new beginnings, of life rewritten. Sarah wasn't just rebuilding the Blake family's estate. She was rebuilding herself, too. Her child, due in a few months, would grow up, surrounded by this legacy, a legacy of hope, renewal, and the power of believing in the impossible. As Sarah rested her hand on her belly, she smiled. The future was bright, and it was hers to shape. The final phase of the Blake estate's transformation was nearing completion. The mansion that had once stood silent and broken now stood tall, its towering walls echoing the sounds of life once again. Sarah gazed out over the sprawling grounds, her heart swelling with pride. The gardens were lush and green, vibrant with flowers and crops, while the once neglected fields now buzzed with activity. The marketplace she had envisioned had come to life, and the people who had come to this town with hopes of a new beginning were now flourishing in ways that Sarah had only dreamed of when she first set foot on the property. When she had first discovered the Blake estate, she had been alone, pregnant, broke, and desperate for a fresh start. She had been buried under the weight of her circumstances, unable to see how any of this would come together. But now, as she stood at the heart of the estate, she saw the culmination of everything she had fought for. The past year had been a whirlwind of hard work, setbacks, and long nights. But in the end, it had all paid off. The estate wasn't just a building, it was a living, breathing entity, a testament to what could be achieved when someone believed in the impossible. The mansion, once dark and decrepit, now glowed with warmth. Its grand halls had been restored, their original charm retained while modern amenities had been added to make it welcoming and comfortable. Sarah had worked tirelessly with her team to ensure the estate honored its history while embracing the future. Every detail, from the carefully restored hardwood floors to the fresh coat of paint on the exterior, was a reflection of the love and care that had gone into rebuilding it. The rooms that had once been abandoned and forgotten were now full of life, bustling with artists, creators, and dreamers, each finding their place in the space Sarah had reimagined. The artist's colony she had dreamed of had flourished beyond her expectations. The mansion's grand hall had become a gallery space for painters, sculptors, and photographers, while the gardens had become an open-air studio for sculptors, ceramicists, and even performance artists. The local musicians had been drawn to the estate's acoustic charm, turning the grand ballroom into a lively gathering space where they could play, write, and collaborate. The estate had transformed into a cultural hub, drawing visitors from nearby towns and even further afield. What had once been a place of wealth and status was now a place of inspiration, creativity, and community. The surrounding lands had also undergone a remarkable transformation. What had once been overgrown fields were now thriving with small-scale farms, where local growers cultivated everything from organic vegetables to flowers, herbs, and fruit. The marketplace had grown organically from the needs of the community. The market square was a vibrant, bustling place every weekend, with farmers, bakers, and artisans selling their goods. People came from miles away to visit, not only to purchase fresh produce and handmade crafts, but also to enjoy the sense of community that had developed around the estate. The air was always filled with the sound of chatter, laughter, and the clinking of coins exchanged in the open stalls. Sarah had brought the community together, not just by restoring the estate, but by creating something everyone could be a part of. She had invited the people of the town into the project, making them stakeholders in the estate's success. The workers, the farmers, the artists, they were all part of a greater whole, working together to bring new life to what had once been a forgotten piece of history. She had breathed new life into the land, and in turn, the land had breathed new life into her and everyone around her. As Sarah walked through the estate on a crisp autumn morning, her heart swelled with pride. The soft golden light of the early morning sun cast long shadows across the freshly paved pathways that meandered through the gardens. The trees had started to change color, their vibrant hues of orange, yellow, and red, a reminder that nothing stays the same forever, but that was okay. Change was what had brought them all here. Change was what had allowed her to take a broken legacy and create something meaningful from it. Walking past the gardens, she saw her child's future unfold before her. In just a few months, her baby would be born, and Sarah knew that this place, this legacy, would be their home. It would be a place of peace, creativity, and opportunity. Her child would grow up in the heart of the estate, surrounded by the beauty and history of the land. Sarah felt a deep sense of peace knowing that the estate was not just her inheritance, it was her child's birthright. But it wasn't just about the future of her child. It was about the future of the entire community. The town had slowly but surely transformed. What had once been a quiet, forgotten corner of the world had come to life. Businesses had opened, old buildings had been renovated, and the streets were once again filled with people. The people who lived here now had a sense of pride in their town, in their community. The Blake estate, once a relic of a past long gone, had become the beating heart of that transformation. Sarah took a moment to pause and look out over the land. She felt the cool breeze on her face, the weight of the estate's legacy both heavy and comforting. It was a new beginning for the estate, for the town, for her. She had rebuilt not just a house, but a community. And that, she realized, was what Samuel Blake had wanted all along. His legacy had not been about wealth or power. It had been about connection, about family, about creating something that could endure. The decisions she had made, the hard work, the long nights, they had all been worth it. The Blake name would no longer be tied to loss or betrayal. It would be tied to growth, to renewal, to community. Sarah had taken what was broken and made it beautiful again. She had rewritten her own story, and in doing so, had written a new chapter for the estate, for the town, and for everyone who had been touched by the journey. As Sarah walked back toward the mansion, she saw the workers gathering in the garden, laughing as they harvested vegetables for the market. The artists were setting up their latest creations in the gallery. The sound of music drifted from the ballroom, filling the air with life. It was all so surreal, so beautiful. She stopped for a moment, watching it all unfold. She had created this. She had taken a broken legacy and turned it into something living, breathing, and thriving. And now, as she stood there with her child on the way, she knew that the future was full of possibilities. Sarah was no longer the woman who had stumbled upon an abandoned cottage. She was the woman who had rebuilt a legacy, who had brought people together, and who had created something that would last for generations. The Blake estate was no longer just a place, it was a symbol of hope, of resilience, and of the power to create a new beginning, no matter how dark the past had been. As the sun set over the estate, Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the world shift in her favor. The future was bright, and she was ready to face it, knowing that this was just the beginning.